Alright guys, Murph's here, and today I want to talk about the 22 long rifle cartridge. I want to talk about some of its history, some of its performance dynamics, as well as some contextual data, and throw in a little bit of some cartridge comparison before it's all said and done. Now, before I get too far into this, because I do frequently forget whenever we talk about cartridges, let's go ahead and do size association right off the bat so we know what it is that we're talking about. So, on the left is the 25 ACP. In the middle is the 22 long rifle, and on the right is the 22 Magnum cartridge. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and start talking about some history. Now, we're not going to talk about the entire history of all 22 long rifle cartridges. I do primarily just want to focus on all rimfire 22 caliber cartridges. I do primarily just want to focus on the 22 long rifle. However, when it comes to history, we do have to kind of start at the beginning. And with that, we would have to go back to the 1860s with the adoption or the production of the Smith & Wesson No. 1 revolver, which was chambered in 22 rimfire. Now, this is actually kind of surprising me because we're talking about a relatively anemic cartridge in comparison to a lot of other black powder revolvers and stuff like that utilized during the war. However, we are talking about self-contained cartridge 22s. So, at the very least, even if it is rather anemic, it's faster to reload and the ammunition will be more reliable than percussion cap initiated black powder loads and cylinders and stuff like that. So I guess there's a bit of an advantage associated with that there. You know, it's kind of one of those, it's better to have a gun than to throw rocks. And that's kind of the overall theme that we have with the 22 long rifle moving forward. Now, 22 rimfire cartridges and many different types of rimfire loads in self-contained cartridges would continue to evolve during this time period until being circumvented and replaced by centerfire loads in everything but the 22. The 22 rimfire would continue to be popular in small vest or pocket type pistols and those types of things, in a woman's handbag or in a gentleman or gambler's pocket. Now, 22 rimfire cartridges, and specifically the 22 long, would eventually give way to smokeless powder 22 long rifle cartridges after the advent of smokeless powder. Now, 22s in general don't necessarily develop a lot of high pressures and all that kind of stuff, be it smokeless powder or black powder. However, there's still a fouling aspect that's associated with black powder that you don't find with smokeless powder. So eventually there would be a rise in popularity of smokeless powder loaded 22 long rifle. Now, this would continue all the way up into today, honestly. There's still a wide variety of 22 rimfire cartridges available out on the market, and 22 long rifle is probably the most pronounced of the bunch, or at least the most popular of the bunch. Now, it has seen a wide variety of uses over the years, graduating from a secondary weapon system for soldiers fighting in the American Revolution to small pocket pistols in the hands of gamblers to eventually being something utilized for hunting type purposes, plinking, as well as using combination survival rifle shotgun patterns that were produced for downed pilots during World War II. Now, you would also see cadet versions of military service rifles chambered in 22 to be able to help cadets and young soldiers learn how to be able to handle a weapon system with a lighter recoiling cartridge. That's one of the key things about the 22 long rifle overall. Now, it did have some use as a suppressor system with the OSS and eventually the CIA, and has continued to see some training type application today. And we'll talk about that more here in just a little bit. That's really about where we're at on history when it comes to 22 long rifle. Let's go ahead and start describing the cartridge and talking about some of its data and getting into the contextual aspect here. So, 22 long rifles specifically, generally range in weights and bullet weights from 20 to 60 grains, with the majority of the popular grainage falling between 36 and 40 grains. You can see velocities as low as 575 feet per second and as high as 1700, with the majority of them coming in just over 1,000 to around 1,500 feet per second. The cartridge itself can be a soft lead projectile or a jacketed hollow point or even FMJ. And the outside diameter of the projectile is actually the same diameter as the cartridge casing. So the attachment for the cartridge case, what it actually crimps to, is a heeled portion of the bullet, which is an extrusion coming off the back of the projectile. The cartridge casing is 15 millimeters long and is rimmed, which is also the location of your primer compound instead of being a center fire type arrangement, which we see with a lot of other major calibers. All right, so there's kind of our data-driven portion here. Let's go ahead and start talking about some contextual aspects, because 22s have had a lot of kind of ridiculous capabilities attributed to them. That's something that we need to talk about here overall. Now, I've heard it, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard it, whenever we talk about a discussion of utilizing 22 in a self-defense type situation. People will say that, well, 22 will, go in your foot and it'll come out your head. It'll just bounce around all over your body. Or, if you shoot somebody in the head, it's going to go through their forehead and it's going to bounce off of the back of their head and scramble up their brains like that. Reality has proven that that's not entirely true. There's a couple things we've got to talk about with this first off. So, bullets have a tendency to follow bone. It's not unusual for someone to get shot in the leg with a 5.56 and have it exit out their knee or something like that. Those types of things happen. 22s are especially going to have that type of dynamic happen when they come up against a thick bone, like say, your thigh or perhaps some of the bones in your arm, in which it's going to not necessarily have the velocity or mass in order to be able to punch through that harder object, and it's going to wind up following that object. Ribs may not be as big of a deal, but in the extremities, you have kind of denser bones. Now, whenever we talk about injuries to the head, Grantham, actually not that long ago, managed to get a hold of some fantastic dummies in order to be able to test some of this. Now, instead of shooting just normal ballistic gelatin, which ballistic gelatin is fantastic to be able to have a general association with what penetration is going to do with the bullet. However, it is a medium that is supposed to be capturing a lot of the densities, the multiple different types of densities that you will find in the human body, and it's a calibration amongst all of those. Whereas the dummies that Grantham was shooting were actually, like, there was a fleshy portion that was supposed to replicate human flesh. There was a bone portion that was supposed to replicate human bone, and then brain matter and all that kind of stuff. They were, I can only assume, incredibly expensive. And his testing in shooting those dummies in the head was that that 22 pretty much performed like a bullet would. It didn't necessarily bounce around inside and do all this kind of crazy stuff. It didn't come back out the front of his head or anything like that. It punched into the target and it did damage to the brain. So this bounce around thing is not necessarily something that's so based in reality. Now, if you do want to talk about penetration type tests and what 22 does to the body, that becomes very interesting. And for this, we wind up going to Lucky Gunner. Now, guys who've been on the channel for a little while know that I like to use Lucky Gunner for pistol ballistic comparison because they have such a comprehensive body, testing a wide variety of loads and doing multiple tests, having multiple bullet representations for expansion and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of information. They did their 22 testing between 2 and 4 inch barrels. So even there, now we have double the amount of results for each of these loads. Now we can take a look at this, we can see quite a few interesting dynamics. First off, when it comes to FBI testing, the minimum penetration distance is 12 inches in ballistic gelatin, and the maximum distance for duty type use is 18 inches. Now, the FBI probably errs on the side of being able to have greater penetration for their uses. However, in self-defense situations, we should probably be a little bit more conservative in our estimates. Now, keep in mind, guys, with ballistic gelatin being calibrated to represent multiple medias, 18 inches in ballistic gelatin is not necessarily 18 inches in the human body. And furthermore, why are we worried about these penetration distances? Well, a lot of it is not just a matter of I shoot somebody while they're facing me in the chest, as much as during the course of a struggle, them attempting to charge at me or flee or whatever it is that they may be doing, I might wind up hitting them here and the shot be angled towards their shoulder. I need to be able to account for that distance across the body in order to be able to hit vital fight-stopping type characteristics with my bullet, cavitation, whatever it is, depending on what the projectile is. Now, right off the bat, if we look at the velocities that we're getting out of the 22 long rifle, we are not achieving cavitation. So secondary wound channels and all that kind of stuff, that's not what we're talking about. We have to talk about primary wound channel and what that bullet is doing in that wound channel. And if we look at the 22 long rifle wound channel, we see that penetration distance for most of the loads on Lucky Gunner's chart comes in under 12 inches. There are a couple that manage to surpass, but not very far past 12 inches. Okay, well, penetration is a thing. We already know we don't have enough velocity for cavitation, so, well, hollow point loads should help out with this, right? It's because maybe if I can't necessarily get optimum penetration, if I can get the optimum 1.5 times expansion out of my projectile, at the very least, I can cause a lot of surface area for destruction and have a wider possibility, tissue destruction, all that kind of stuff, have a wider possibility to be able to produce fight-ending characteristics inside of the body. And unfortunately, in this regard, the 22 fails yet again. Pretty much none of the bullets recovered by Lucky Gunner reached optimum expansion. And a lot of that comes down to is that you're trying to get optimal expansion out of a 22 caliber 40 grain projectile. There's not that much mass to be able to get out of it. Even if it increases by 1.5 times, yes, it's better than nothing, but it's really not an optimal wounding result. So this is something that we kind of have to keep in mind with this. This is not helpful, and this is one of the problematic things with 22 long rifle from a performance type standpoint. The bullets just aren't achieving that much. So normally, if I can't necessarily have like consistent high velocities in handgun or in any cartridge, honestly, then I want to look over to, can I at least have mass so that perhaps I have greater surface area to be able to cause tissue destruction even in the FMJ round. But if I have a hollow point, then I have a greater possibility of being able to get a wider expansion and all those types of things and be able to produce that really fantastic primary wound channel. Whereas if I can have high velocity, then I can get those secondary wound characteristics and then also hopefully ensure optimum expansion out of my projectile because I'll have the velocity necessary in order to be able to achieve that. With a 22 long rifle, I have neither. However, our contextual aspect doesn't even necessarily just cover the purely numbers-driven aspect here of having too little velocity and not enough mass in order to be able to equate to effective energy on target and then the penetration and wounding capabilities within the wound channel. There's also quite a few functional aspects of 22 long rifle that make them kind of regrettable choices for a self-defense cartridge. So first off, semi-automatic 22s are well known for being somewhat finicky on ammunition. I have shot a wide variety of semi-automatic 22 handguns over the years, and some have fed everything I put in them flawlessly, and those are guns that stood out in my esteem, whereas a lot of other systems, a lot of other handguns that I've worked with had a certain load or certain velocity, a certain grainage or bullet profile that they preferred and would only really run that style. And that's potentially problematic, though once you figure that out, it's not that big of a deal, right? You just stock that ammunition and you keep it around. However, it's still a limiting factor, something to keep in mind, not a big deal. Why don't we go ahead and talk about some other aspects like the rimmed cartridge casing? Well, rimmed cartridge casings notoriously have issues in semi-automatic systems, especially when they're magazine fed. Rim cartridge cases don't stack that well, and you wind up having to really change a lot of things about your ergonomics in order to be able to present them and consistently present them to the chamber in such a manner that they will reliably feed. It is not uncommon to see a lot of failures in semi-automatic magazine-fed 22 handguns, and a lot of it does come back to the rimmed cartridge casing. Well, I can fix that problem by going over a revolver. Same deal with the bullet profiles and all that kind of stuff. Revolvers, as long as you get it aligned, the chamber aligned with the barrel, it's not going to be a big deal, and you would be correct in that. Another thing that becomes a limiting factor with semi-automatic 22s is going to be consistency and powder charge, which you'll wind up, since 22s are blowback operated systems, you wind up running into a lot of issues with them effectively feeding and cycling and all that kind of stuff. Again, something that's not necessarily covered in a revolver. Now, the biggest issue that actually is suffered by both of these systems, both revolvers and 22 semi-autos, is inconsistent primer compounds. Every 22 long rifle load I've tested over the years has had a failure to function. It has had some click no bang, and even with a second strike on that particular primer compound, it did not go. I've had some that had a lower probability of it occurring with. CCIs I've had great success with. However, I've still had failure in CCI ammunition. Because it's a rimfire system. There is something in the manufacturing process that makes those primers a little bit unreliable. If you go into bulk type ammunition, you're expecting to use that to defend yourself, the problem gets increased tenfold. You will have a lot of failures in any single pack of bulk 22 long rifle ammunition. It's the production type aspect of it. As you increase production, you are also going to increase your possibility for failures. That's something that has to be taken into account. And now in a revolver, it's not a big deal because you can just go ahead and pull the trigger again and get to the next chamber in the cylinder. However, in a semi-auto, you're going to have to conduct malfunction clearance at that point and hopefully get that weapon system back into the fight. Regardless, in either situation, it is unacceptable to me to endorse a scenario where I can have a higher probability of click no bang. Now, of course, the same type of thing happens in center fire ammunition, but it does not happen as frequently. And that's a very key aspect here. Now, when it comes to 22 revolvers, they can be a little bit more difficult in order to be able to keep loaded. And that's one of the key things whenever we're talking about self-defense type situations. Sure, you could probably solve the problem within the cylinder capacity of a revolver, especially 22, since they'll generally come in 9-shot cylinders. However, we should not be planning for the bare minimum. We should be trying to accommodate for the possibility that the fight takes longer than that, and then be really happy when it doesn't, should the fight come along. So for me, if I'm dealing with anything that has single-digit capacity, I for sure make sure that I have an additional source of feed on me. And a lot of times I'll do it with high-capacity guns as well. Sorry guys, I've been talking for a while and realized I had not taken a sip of this absolutely delicious whiskey. It's one of my favorites, if not my overall favorite. So, with cylinder type revolvers, you can absolutely get speed loaders for them, which is surprised me. I didn't know you could do that. But that is assuming that you have a swing out cylinder revolver. There are plenty of double action revolvers that are side gate loading, and those are going to be very slow to keep loaded. Now, the great thing about a revolver, especially a double action, because we shouldn't at all be talking about single action guns for self-defense, double action revolvers in 22s having 9-shot cylinders have very comparable capacity to semi-automatic systems. So that's nice. That's a really swell setup if that's what you're looking for. However, we still have the minimal characteristics, the minimal wounding capability of a 22 long rifle, to where it would be my full expectation that somebody, if you used it in a self-defense situation, you were dumping the entire magazine and or cylinder into that target. Whereas normally, with a lot of the different, center fire options out there on the market, I would tell you that you're shooting the target until it is no longer resisting. With a 22 long rifle, we're going for the whole shebang. Now, don't consider this legal advice by any means. It's something to definitely consider and think about, though, as far as what you actually think your effect is going to be on target with that particular cartridge. All right, guys, we've done a lot of contextual discussion, but what about comparison? Well, I decided to compare the 22 long rifle to something that also would have come out and been very popular in pocket pistols moving into the 20th century. That would have been developed by John Moses Browning and chambered in some of his early semi-automatic pistol designs. Now, in this case, if you guessed that I am going to talk about the 25 Auto, go ahead and get yourself a cookie. You are correct. The 6.35 millimeter Browning was developed in 1905 by John Moses Browning, and was very popular with vest and pocket type pistol carry. A very early popular concealed carry option out on the market. Now this is interesting because we're talking about a 35-ish to 40 grain projectile in 25 caliber set into a rimmed cartridge casing. A semi-rimmed. It's a very rebated rim. It's not quite as large as a lot of other rimmed options out on the market, but it is most definitely rimmed. So, how does it stack up against the 22 long rifle? Well, for that particular loading, you're generally looking at about 800 to 900-ish feet per second, which is kind of slow. And the mass isn't necessarily even that much increased as much as the surface area for that mass is increased. So, what does that bring us into for wound channel and all that kind of stuff? Well, we already know that we're not necessarily getting any of that secondary wound channel with this cartridge as well. What about penetration distances in media? Well, With the 25 auto, pretty much all of our options are coming in at or below FBI minimums. Okay, that's not a good start. What is expansion looking like? Well, again, looking at the Lucky Gunner charts, pretty much all the options they've tested so far do not expand. None of the results show any effective type of expansion, which is not good. So in this case, we've diminished velocity even more so than what we would expect with the 22 long rifle, and we're getting even less expansion. And what I think that comes down to is a very important aspect of these smaller caliber options is that it's not worthwhile trying to get expansion out of them as much as it becomes now more important in order to be able to get that better penetration so that at least you start poking holes, though very small holes, in vital organs so that you can end the fight that way. Sounds like the wife just got home, guys, so bear with me for a moment, if you will. So, with that being the case, 25 auto is not worthwhile for hollow points. 22 long rifle, though getting some expansion, is not necessarily helping out with hollow points. So between these two, which is the better option? In my own personal opinion, I still say the 25 auto, and this might be very surprising, and let me explain. It entirely comes down to the primer compound. Being a center fire cartridge, the 25 auto is going to have better, reliable ignition than the 22 long rifle will ever have. Now, when it comes to 25 auto handguns out there on the market, almost all of them are small pocket pistols and are not necessarily the best thing in the world to fight with, which means to me, both of these are suboptimal options. However, they do check the block of the primary goal in a gunfight, which is have a gun. Now, keep in mind, guys, we are all the way on the back foot if this is the type of decision that we're making. I could throw rocks or I could have a 25 long rifle. That's pretty terrible. This is not an ideal circumstance or outcome. We need to try to better set ourselves up so that we don't have to make these types of decisions because the options aren't that great. However, from a self-defense standpoint, if we're talking about by either the amount of money you have in your bank account or your physical capability, a 22 or 25 caliber defensive handgun are your options, it's better than nothing. Now, if it's a cost type thing, you don't have a lot of money hanging out in the bank account, but you still want to have something to defend yourself with, I would implore you at the earliest possible circumstance to upgrade your self-defense capability. Now, I'm not trying to tell you how to spend your money. I'm not trying to tell you how to allocate funds or handle your finances or any of those types of things. All I'm trying to outline to you is how important it is that you upgrade your options. It's got to sit somewhere. You know, maybe it's you just peel off a couple of bucks every paycheck or something like that. It doesn't have to be anything drastic, but this is where I would preference a high point over carrying a 22, personally. All right, so if 22 long rifles aren't necessarily a great choice for self-defense, what are they a great choice for? Small game. And as an introductory cartridge for new shooters. Lots of people, thousands of people have learned on the 22 long rifle, be it handguns or actual rifles. They have learned around that cartridge in order to be able to practice fundamentals with a low risk, I don't want to say low risk, thousands of people die every year from 22 long rifles, but a non-imposing cartridge, something that it doesn't have a lot of recoil, it's not terribly loud or anything along those lines, and allows them to just focus on the shooting fundamentals aspect of using firearms so that they can eventually graduate to a more major caliber. Once we introduce the idea of recoil management, breathing, trigger squeeze, sight alignment, all those types of things, in something that's fairly low threat as far as, you know, confusing or overbearing in recoil. Once we get through that, then we can start introducing major calibers. Now, a lot of people advocate for 22 as a training type system, and this has been brought up a lot. It was a big thing with cadet rifles, which for the most part have kind of gone away, and it has also been very big in recent years with tactical type setups, especially with there being a lot of fluctuations in the cost of 9mm, 5.56, all these different cartridges. 22 long rifle has been very popular as a training replacement, and I conditionally agree with this overall. 22 within the last 10 years has been difficult to find. 2013, 22 long rifle was completely off the shelves. However, when it is available, it's cheaper than other options, though its price has gone up in recent years, but It does allow you, if you have a weapon system that accurately reflects what it is that you plan on defending or training with, it does give you the opportunity to be able to run your same holsters or run your same optics so that you can at least build those touch points and make them very natural. So with that being the case, that is a great use for 22 as a trainer. But for a long-term trainer, you still eventually need to be able to switch over to your full power cartridge that you actually plan on defending yourself with. So you can start working on those fundamentals of real recoil management and maintaining, your sight picture and all that kind of stuff throughout the engagement process with something that is more significant in recoil. Doesn't have to be super significant, just has to be more so than what you're normally working with. So, someone's super stoked bombs home. So, those are some of the things that I've observed with 22s. Now, something else I'd throw out there along with this is as a suppressor host. Now, historically, 22s have been used for like assassinations and all that kind of stuff, but I don't have a lot of use personally for handgun suppressor hosts to begin with, but I would have to throw out there that 22 suppressor hosts are pretty fun. So I can understand the appeal. All right, guys. I think that's pretty much what I got, except for some admin notes here at the end. So I hope you guys got enough out of this, and have a good day. All right, guys, admin notes. Come here. Okay, sorry. So, admin notes. Murph's Law is now on Facebook. So if you guys enjoy this content, you enjoy interacting with it and all that kind of stuff, you should totally hit us up on Facebook, join the group, get involved in the discussion, see some, behind the scenes type stuff, get updates on what's going on with the channel or what's going on with Murph's Law or a lot of other people who are of a similar overall mindset to what it is that I show on this channel. So, look forward to seeing you guys there. Link will be in the description. And that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.